and they want to keep it in business so they can continue to launder money. I mean, the whole thing is sick. And, I've been writing about this for 20 years, actually longer than that, about 30, 35 years. And it's one of the reasons that I'm not very popular in Washington, no matter who's in power. They don't want the public knowing these things. And yes, others have written books about them. And, of course, after the book's written and I start to do a tour, they suicide themselves. And I wasn't going to stay around to be suicided.
If a lending institution sells a mortgage to a financial services company to make up asset-based securities, what is the typical profit for the lending institution on a typical mortgage?
Boy, I got to tell you, you got me stumped. I don't know the answer to that. But I will go one step further. There are judges who are honoring the request for the original deed in the transaction, and banks have sold these mortgages to others. They've kept some, but not too many, perhaps 10 or 15 for 20% of what they wrote. And the rest of them were securitized in what are called collateralized debt obligations and SIVs, and so that, and then some of the mortgages were cut up, and so you might have 50,000 mortgages in a bond, but they're not full each mortgages. There might be just the interest payments, or they might be a derivative on part of the mortgage life, and on and on. And so it's very, very difficult to go in and pull one mortgage out. And so what happens is that it could be years before they find the mortgage, and a judge that feels that the lender should be responsible for that says, until you come up with the mortgage, you're not going to foreclose. And a lot of them are going on. They just don't tell you about them in the newspaper or in the media. And so, but I don't know what they make, and that was the question. But I had to throw that in.
But don't you think, Bob, that maybe because with the second bailout and the push to rewrite all these mortgages of these subprime and to get people to refinance, and they would sidestep that, you're right, they can't find that one part of that mortgage, but by rewriting it, it would eliminate it in that group of, wouldn't it?
It would have to be withdrawn from the security in which it was.
Right.
And then, if it's rewritten, I would assume it would go into the lender's balance sheet, because they're not selling too many securitized packages of bonds today because no one will buy them anymore. And so...
so they're really not helping the homeowner. They're really helping themselves.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're bailing the bank out.
Yeah.
It's been that way from the beginning.
Yeah, but with the dressing that now they're here to help the homeowner, which they really are not.
No. They don't care one bit about the public. They don't care about the economy. They don't care about anything.
If a financial...
they just want money and power. That's all they're interested in.
If a financial services company goes bankrupt, is it true that the credit default swaps that it sold are non-collectible?
They are collectible if there was anything, as far as collateral is concerned, behind the seller of the credit default swap. And if the seller can't come up with, in this case, cash, the seller has to renege or go bankrupt. So we don't know. Every case is different. But that's what we were just talking about earlier in relation to Lehman and AIG. They have a major problem because they were writing credit default swaps naked. They had no money behind them. It was like a big gambling casino. No one ever thinking that the bottom was going to be pulled out. And so there are some that have gone into default and some that haven't, some that never will. There is collateralization, and lots of them, trillions of dollars, which are naked. And, you haven't seen anything yet. Wait till they try to match this thing up. And let's say that only 5% are naked. The whole system still goes down. That's how bad it is.
Do you agree that the financial service companies that were bailed out were too big to fail, thus forcing a credit default swap liability onto the American taxpayer?
Yes. That is a correct statement.
Who were the main buyers of the collateralized mortgage obligations and credit default swaps?
60% were European financial institutions. The other 40% were, for the most part, American financial institutions. The Chinese had a little bit, and the Japanese and Singapore and others, the Arab states. But, in the scheme of things, it didn't amount to a hill of beans. The real losers were the European institutions as well as U.S.
Who were the main buyers of naked credit default swaps?
Well, that's hard to tell because you got to take one at a time, and because we don't have the information, you can't say. We just don't know, and we'll never know because government is hiding everything. It's a shame, but our government is our enemy. And it's as simple as that. And it's not fair, and it's not uncommon. History is replete with that, and that's the way it is.
Oh, let's see here.
See, in the caveman days, if you didn't like what the leader was doing, and he was a tough customer, you got a jawbone from an ass and hit him over the head with it. But we get rules today that inhibit doing such things, unless, of course, there's revolution, which there could very well be in time, all over the world for that matter.
Here's a question about, we haven't talked about this for a while. There's been a lot of talk that President Obama is not a natural-born citizen, is not eligible to hold the office of president. He says if he really is, why won't he simply lay the matter to rest and produce the necessary documents instead of hiring high-powered attorneys to squash any effort to bring them public? And the second question is, the Supreme Court function is to determine the constitutionality of issues. Why are they refusing to hear and rule on the issue? And why has Congress refused to look at it either?
Because they're all in on it. Pretty simple. There is an Illuminati. There are people who are connected through different organizations who work together in their final plan for world government. And they have started wars and financed both sides of most wars for the last 1,000 years. They have tried this power struggle for world domination of everybody for a long, long time. And this time, we're going to catch him, and he ain't going to get away.
Insurance bonds, with them failing, are those a greater loss than the subprime? And what will happen and how?
In the insurance companies?
Yeah.
That's a hard question to answer because they are also hiding stuff in their books. And we know that Lincoln and Hartford groups are both in trouble because they have to borrow money from the federal government and the state in the case of Hartford. And you don't borrow money unless you're in deep doo-doo in that business. And so there's probably going to be a lot of others who will get in trouble, and that's going to be expedited if we go to a 38 to 4,200 down because the stock companies have a lot of money invested in the stock market, and the same goes with the pension plans. Now, the mutual companies are more limited, and they have to invest in bonds. They're going to have losses, but nothing like the stock companies are going to have. And at a 4,000 Dow, they're down now. The ones that have stocks and bonds, which are the stock companies, they're down probably 35%, and they're probably going to go down 65%. And that means that those pension profit sharing plans won't be able to pay, and also it'll bring in insurance companies, in some instances, insolvencies.